What's good, y'all? I'm here to talk a bit about the new DMX record, Exodus, that was released on May 28th, so last week. Uh, Obviously, as you all probably know, DMX died last April, on April 9th, at 50 years old. His death sent shockwaves throughout the hip hop community and probably into the pop cultural landscape as well. I mean, DMX was one of the most important hip hop artists of my time. His debut album, It's Dark and Hell is Hot, dropped in 1998, right when I was graduating from 8th grade and heading into high school. So his music really defined my high school years. I grew up in Houston, Texas. So back then, our local stuff was hot. All that music coming out of New Orleans, like No Limit and Cash Money, was popping. But in terms of like East Coast music, Rough Riders kind of ran things, especially when that Rough Riders anthem dropped. It really ran my school. Shout out to Westbury High School in Houston, Texas. And I have an article or a short little piece that I wrote about my personal connection to DMX, and I wrote that in the wake of his death, and I'll drop that in the comment section down below. So Exodus is DMX's first album since 2012, and his first album on Def Jam since 2003. And Def Jam is obviously the label where he first made his mark and is where he became an international superstar some 20 years ago or so. It was executive produced by Swizz Beatz, his longtime collaborator and one of the most successful hip hop producers of the last 20 years. Swizz handled some of the production. There were also other producers like A-Rap Music, Kanye West, Jerry Wonda, and there were tons of collabs. Jay-Z and Nas are on there. Nas is on there twice. Griselda drops a verse or some verses. The Lox is on there. Alicia Keys, Bono, Snoop Dogg, and more. In terms of my general assessment, the first thing I want to note is DMX's voice. And it's clear that some of the struggles he had over his life kind of affected his voice. It, on Exodus, didn't sound as powerful, strong, heavy, or gruff as it once did, especially earlier in his career. But I knew this going in. If you listen to some of DMX's materials or performances over the last several years, you knew this already. A few years ago, he released a greatest hits compilation where he went back and re-recorded some of his old hit songs. And if you compare those re-recordings to the original songs, the differences are stark, right? The voice is just not as powerful. And so, but I knew that going into Exodus, so I wasn't surprised, but I can say that it kind of affected the quality of the album for me. That being said, there were some really strong moments on this record. Bath Salts, the Jay-Z and Nas collab, That's My Dog with the Lox, Walking in the Rain, the second Nas collab on the album, all of those feature semi-vintage DMX performances. They were able to recreate some of the What These Women Want magic on Take Control, which featured Snoop Dogg. And that was a surprising collabo for me, even considering their verses from last year. But it worked really well. And Letter to My Son is probably the most emotional and compelling song on the record, especially if you know DMX's history and his relationship with his oldest son. It's a captivating record that really illuminates why we first connected with DMX in the first place a long time ago. That dude wore his emotions and experiences on his sleeve, right? But there was always a glimmer of hope, right? And I think all of that comes through on Letter to My Son. Ultimately, my biggest issue with this record was Swizz Beatz, and I'll admit I've never been a big Swizz Beatz fan. I never really liked his production outside of a few beats. I don't like hearing his voice on recordings, so I don't like his ad-libs nor his hooks. His voice is, I guess, grating to me for whatever reason. But that's neither here nor there. I have issue with his role as executive producer on this record. As executive producer, it was his duty to make the personnel, thematic, technical, and production decisions that would lead to the best representation of this version of DMX. And I feel like he dropped the ball to some extent. Some of those DMX verses didn't sound mastered. Some of those DMX verses just weren't good. They were subpar and should have never been released. The production was hit or miss, and there were just too many guest appearances, right? And I understand where DMX was in his life and career, and I understand the thought to surround him with lots of talent that he can lean on to some extent. I get all of that. But DMX was a singular artist, right? We come to DMX for DMX. We want to hear his experiences, his emotions, his outlook on certain things, his spirituality. You know, we want that personal connection, and I feel like some of those guests just kind of get in the way of that. But despite my issues with the album, I'm glad they released it. We lost DMX way too soon. And so I'm glad we were able to get a kind of a final snapshot of his artistry towards the end of his life. And so that's what I think about DMX's Exodus. But I'd love to hear what you think about the record. Please do drop your thoughts, criticisms, ideas in the comment section. And until next time, I'll holler at you.